In Afghanistan, angry protesters have tried to storm a U.S. military base during nationwide demonstrations against American troops' burning of Qur'ans. Well, police opened fire on protesters outside the Mehtarlam base in the eastern Laghman province, leaving several people wounded. An apology from the U.S. President Barack Obama over the desecration of the Holy Qur'an has failed to temper the outrage of Afghans. So far, at least 20 people have been killed across the country in demonstrations against the desecration by U.S. troops. Well, 2 Afghan laborers have told of how the U.S. troops at the Bagram Air Base burnt the copies of the Holy Qur'an. Take a listen.
When we saw it, we said, let's see if they also have a Quran. When I first threw myself into the flames, I found several chapters of the Quran in the fire. Chapter 1, Chapter 2. All of them were thrown in together in the flames. It was in an area where there was American magazines. Everything there belonged to the Americans. It was their garbage. We threw ourselves there and took out copies of the Quran which were still on fire. We stood there and I said, up to the last drop of my blood, I would take out the Quran from there, regardless of how much power US forces have. I am not scared. I just want to defend my Quran and my God.
When US forces saw the state of people, of how deeply angry they were, translators went back to the Americans and told them, if these people are that angry here, imagine what will happen outside when they get out of here with the burnt Qurans.
Well, to discuss this further, we're being joined by the editor of AmericaHijacked.com, James Morris from Los Angeles. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Morris. Now, apologies have been issued both by the U.S. president and the military, but many dismiss these efforts as basically to curb the protests rather than a true understanding of the offense caused here. Do you agree?
Thank you for having me back on Press TV. It's actually America-Hijacked.com, but you can also get to it by going to USHijacked.com. The situation you have with the Quran burning now, it goes back to U.S. support for Israel with regard to why we went into Afghanistan in the first place. 9/11 tragically happened because of U.S. support for Israel against the Palestinian people. And after 9/11, of course, a tragic event, thousands of Americans killed, and nobody wants to see that. I'm an America First patriot. We went into Afghanistan. That was a reason given. And we've been occupying Afghanistan for 10-plus years, billions of dollars spent, thousands of American lives put at risk, Americans killed and maimed, and we're still there. And now we have this desecration of the Koran incident, which has basically become the Waterloo event, from my perspective, for the U.S. in Afghanistan. There's no way this can be sustained. Prior, we were actually, the Taliban resistance was composed of the Pathans or Pashtuns, and that was the Taliban. But now this is spread to the Tajiks, the Hazaras, and the Uzbeks, and they were sympathetic to the American occupation. I'm not saying they necessarily went along with it culturally and religiously, but they were receptive to it. But this has just pushed it over the edge. No apology from General Allen, the commander of ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, or President Obama this morning here in the U.S. is going to make any difference here. They've locked down the U.S. Embassy, and it's just going to get even worse, the resistance. And it's time, like Ron Paul has said repeatedly and accurately, to get out of Afghanistan and bring our troops home and put them on the U.S. border instead. Last night he said that during the Republican debate. He was the only one there standing up against the neocon war for Israel agenda that wants to keep U.S. troops there so they can be used against Iran. Again, it's time to come home. And I think one thing to also say here, you have to look back to George Washington's farewell address. We just had President Washington's birthday, remember, this past week. And in his farewell address, he had warned against passionate attachments for foreign countries like we have for Israel. And we went into Afghanistan for Israel. We went into Iraq for Israel. It's time to cut that association with Israel, bring our troops home, listen to Ron Paul. Again, I saw the news after my prior interview on Press TV earlier today, and 2 American troops have been killed as a result of this. How many more American lives have to be spent and blood and treasure from America fighting wars for and because of Israel? It's unacceptable.
Indeed. Now, as the death toll also increases in Afghanistan from these protests, how do you see stunts such as these affecting the U.S. talks with the Taliban?
Well, I don't think they can be good. I think the U.S. knows that, and again, I'm not with the U.S. military. I'm not a spokesperson for the U.S. military. Like I said, I'm an America First patriot. And by the way, I saw how Senator John McCain, who's been a mouthpiece for these same neoconservatives, and he's been covering for Israel going back to the USS Liberty attack, how he covered for Israel with the murdering and maiming of U.S. Marines and sailors on that ship. But that's another story. But again, he's in Israel undercutting General Martin Dempsey, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and basically when he's doing that, he's undercutting President Obama as well. So with regard to the Taliban situation and the negotiations that as you'd asked here, the U.S. is desperately seeking a way out of Afghanistan, and the only way to do that is a negotiated settlement. We're losing the war in Afghanistan. There's no way that war can be won no matter how many troops you put in there. America just doesn't have the resources. We're broke, and we've got to negotiate and get out and put our troops on the Mexican border instead and protect America, not go to war in the Middle East for the sake of Israel.
Indeed, and very quickly, if you can, as you mentioned, the U.S. is looking for an exit strategy from Afghanistan. With anti-American sentiments almost at bursting point right now in Afghanistan, what kind of a legacy are they going to leave behind?
A terrible legacy. I mean, we seem to be going the way of Rome, as Chalmers Johnson predicted in his Sorrows of Empire book and the book that came after that, Nemesis, The Last Days of the American Republic. And I just heard your piece that introduced this segment, too, about the oil prices soaring. Keep in mind that is a result of the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran by the pro-Israel lobby in America, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and the neoconservatives. So Americans are now paying the price not only in Afghanistan, but also at the gas pump, the petrol pump here, because of the same neoconservative and pro-Israel lobby that wants us to have even more American soldiers die fighting a war against Iran for Israel. When is the world going to stand up to that? You've got a very strong pro-Israel lobby here in America and one at the EU and Europe, the Atlantic Council. That's how the sanctions against Iran got passed there. The world has to rise up against this Zionist yoke that's not only over America, but over England and the EU as well, before we go to a world war because of it.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That was James Morris, the editor of America-Hijack.com, joining us there on the line from Los Angeles. Mr. Morris, we appreciate your comments here on Press TV.